Hi, everyone. Very warm welcome. We're just getting in a few more participants coming in. Hi, Smita. We'll just wait for a minute so that, we don't get people kind of coming in, and then maybe we'll start off here.
Long time no see, Shira.
Yes.
Now, thanks for the wonder of Zoom.
Yes. Okay, I think we'll start, let people, kind of come in as a thing. So welcome, everybody. My name is Sriram, and after spending about 25 years in HR, I now focus on happiness at work, and I'm the author of the book Happiness Habits. And I have my own framework for becoming happier at work. So I'm launching this forum to speak with experts to get a deep dive on topics relevant to workplaces. And so that, it's not just a touch and go, but something that we delve deeper into and really get meaningful insights, which can be used in our day-to-day work places. So I have with me Smita Tharoor. Smita is a TEDx speaker. She's the founder of Tharoor and Associates. She's also the co-founder of Culturalytics. She runs a podcast series called Stories Seldom Told, and it's very interesting. You people in the audience, you must check it out. Very, very different, kind of stories over there. Smita is also the recipient of the Global Diversity Award for her work on unconscious bias. She has over 25 years of experience in working with different sets of companies in various industries. And she's currently based out of London. And more than all of this, I think Smita is just a wonderfully warm and approachable person, and she's making a difference to the world in her own way. Smita, very, very warm welcome. It's been a while, of course, since we've met in person and since you trained us on unconscious bias all those years ago. Truly grateful that you've agreed to be on this. And I would be very happy for our audience to maybe get to know a little bit better. And, if you could tell us a little more about what you could do. And I see some AI in your profile, which wasn't there earlier. So, kind of, if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll take it from there.
Oh, thank you, Shira. And I'm really happy to be here because for the audience, as Shriram said, that I had done some work with the company that Shriram was working for at the time. He was head of HR, and we certified a large group of people on unconscious bias. But what to me, and then we had not met, and this is, remind me, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, I can't even remember, but we had not met. And I have done this work with so many people over the years. But I remember Shriram so clearly in my head because I remember the stories that Shriram shared. And I think the power of stories and unconscious bias is what makes us. So I was thrilled to know that you are doing what you're doing. Sorry, you asked me to talk about myself, and I'm talking about you. What do I do? Yeah, I mean, I do the same. I continue to work with organizations in different parts of the world. And now, especially with Zoom, it's even easier. Don't have to get in a plane and suffer jet lag. Essentially, talking about cultural behavioral change in organizations and how we can manage that cultural behavioral change in X organization. I do a lot of keynote speaking at conferences. And the 25, by the way, has now become 30. Buddhi ban rahi ho, what can I say? So things change. I just haven't changed that bio. Regarding the AI, a friend of mine and I started an organization that's headed in Bangalore and London. And we use AI to look at cultural behavior in organizations. So in other words, what I do, as Sriram knows, is using the idea of unconscious bias to understand a behavior and behavior analysis in organizations. But now we're kind of taking a step backwards and using AI. And so you can use it for sort of, we did a piece of work, for example, with one leading government bank in India, which had large number of employees, 17,000 employees. And we were able to tell them what kind of behavioral change needs to be done to try and change and improve their culture and behavior. And then we can bring in things like more specific unconscious bias and so on. So that's kind of a very loose a loose introduction. Stories seldom told. Thank you, Shriram. I love it. It gives me a lot of pleasure because once again, because of the fact that communication is so easy, I speak to people around the world in countries that I will probably never go to, who share their stories of resilience, of how their life has changed because of what they have done. You know, I've spoken to people in Afghanistan, in Morocco, in Mexico, in Trinidad, in New Zealand, in Bangalore. The one I most recently posted was of a woman, transgender woman in Bangalore, who Akai, her name is Akai Padmashali, who shares her stories of how she's challenged, you know, how she really felt that she was born in the wrong gender, and how she has really managed to overcome that, and you know, the society's problems that she has to deal with, and she's now an activist. And then the other end of the spectrum, I interviewed somebody who is 95 years old, and for those of us who have elderly parents, this will resonate with you, where she talks about getting old. And what does old mean? What does the word old mean? And what does death mean? And what does dying mean? You see what I'm saying? So lots of stories. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Sriram is going to ask me, and obviously questions possibly from the audience as well.
Yes, yes. And, you know, if people the audience have questions, please put it in the chat box and we'll kind of weave it in or take it up towards the end as well. So, Smita, curious to know, so what drew you into this topic? How did you get into unconscious bias at all?
Thank you. It was a fact. I got into it before it became what we call fashionable in inverted commas. I have to go back a few steps, and it's a story that a few people have begun to ask me, so I've really had to mine. You know, sometimes you just do what you do, right? You don't actually mind your own story. You tell other people to mind theirs, but not your own. And I was born in Bombay, grew up in Calcutta. I'm sorry, I say Bombay and Calcutta. Forgive me if any of you are offended. I love those two cities with those names, but I'm happy to say Mumbai and Kolkata. And my siblings and I, am one of three. I'm the youngest of three. We genuinely grew up in what is of accepting, non-denominational, non-judgmental family. And I'm sorry I'm sharing that story because it's a slightly longer story to come back to why am I doing what I'm doing. And just to explain what I mean by that is I have the firstborn in our home is a boy, then we have two girls. At no point did the girls feel lesser than in terms of gender. If anything, my brother would probably say that we were favored over him. That's one obvious example that you see in many Indian households. At no point were we told about X or Y or Z religion being good, bad, or ugly. In our building, there was a gentleman who was homosexual, who was gay. He's passed away now, which is why I'm using the word was. At no point did our parents say to us, so-and-so is gay, you know, his homosexuality is bad, don't go at ours, you know, none of that. So caste. My father, for those of you from Kerala will understand this, traditionally people from Kerala use their house name, which is actually my mother's house name, which is how it would be traditionally, which is Mundarat. And so my name would be M. Smita. But my parents they were a little modern because we were living in Bombay and so on. They were not living in a remote village. He took his house name, and this is before he got married, in fact, which is Tharoor, and switched it. And he became Chandran Tharoor. And when we were growing up in Bombay and Calcutta, nobody had a clue where we were from, which state of India, and nobody had a clue what caste we were. And that's what my father wanted. That's what my parents wanted. The fact that we are not judged because of these names. You know, I see a Jain, I see a Kalra, I see a Chellappa. I know what that means there automatically because I'm Indian. A Tharoor now, because my brother is well known, you all know we're from Kerala. You all know which caste we are purely because he has brought the surname Tharoor into another level, but not then. So now fast forward to the 80s and I arrive in London and I am talking to people and people who look like me. So brown people, South Asian, who've never even been to India, possibly, because they could have come from East Africa, they could have come from Mauritius, there were so many, the migrations from many hundreds of years ago. And they would talk to me and they would ask me questions. And then people would talk about racism and people would talk about bias. The word bias didn't come in those days. That's a modern language now, but you know what I mean. And I kept thinking, hang on a minute, I'm not feeling it. Nobody's racist towards me. Why are they talking, And I kept thinking about this. And then I realized perhaps people are being racist, perhaps people are being judgmental, but I never saw it as my problem. I saw it as their problem. Does that make sense? And why was that? Because of my narrative and my genuinely, and this is a word I consciously use, privilege, not because of money in the bank, but because of the sense of equality that we grew up with. So then when I started working and I fell into what you realize how long I've been working, it used to be called personnel. It then became HR. I focused on learning and development and retrained and did lots more qualifications, including a master's XYZ. But the more and more and more I was working within the area of learning and development, I was a salaried employee those days, the more I realized that we need to help ourselves understand what is our narrative. How can we unpick our narrative to address better time management, to address becoming a better manager, to address becoming bullying and harassment in organization. I mean, whatever you want, any title you like, if we first start with us, we're able to address that better. So that's a long answer to your short question.
Wonderful. And of course, I didn't know this background. So it was, kind of a new thing for me as well. And even at that point of time when we had, kind of met you, it was still a very, kind of a new subject. Okay, people are curious, not really kind of aware that it's an issue, but more out of curiosity, I think people would come and, kind of attend those sessions. So and I think it's still, not yet a very conscious, mature, kind of term in organizations. I think it's on its, kind of journey with the diversity initiatives and other things kind of coming to the fore. But just for our, kind of audience, in a simple way, if you were to just help them understand what really unconscious bias is from your...
It's essentially, I can make it simpler than my story that I shared. And I use the word story again consciously because we're all about stories. And that's why, when I first started talking about Sriram's story, I still remember the story that you shared with us, Sriram. And so we are made up of many stories, right? And these stories influence us without realizing it. But before that, let's just take these two words, unconscious bias. Let's take the second word first. The word bias, if you check the Oxford English Dictionary or Collins or wherever it is you look in a dictionary, or for those of you right now, check Mr. Google or Mrs. Google or Auntie Google, who knows who we call them these days, and it'll suggest that the word bias means preference. So it is the word preference for or against. A place, a thing, a food, a person, a country, an idea. It's a preference. And the word unconscious, as we all know, is that we don't know. So we don't know that we have a preference for X. That's simply all it is. But the word bias itself has now got, for want of a better word, an unconscious bias connotation as to be negative. We, in the context of our language the world over, when we use the word bias, we use it in a negative connotation, but it doesn't have to be. It could be positive or negative, but we don't know that it's an implicit bias. That is another word. And you're saying this is new? In 1995, a woman at Harvard University who is Hyderabadi born, her name is Mazareen Banaji. So she's Indian born. And I met her. She's a delightful woman. She's a psychologist at Harvard University. She and another guy whose name is Andrew Greenfeld, I think, but don't quote me, I could be wrong. It's funny is that I remember the Mazareen Banaji easily. That's my conscious bias. But I can't remember the Andrew something. Anyway, that's by the by. They coined the phrase implicit bias in 1995. So you think unconscious bias is new? It's not. It's just that it's come into the mainstream, like flat trousers in 1975 or whatever, and torn jeans in 2020, that's another story. But you see what I'm saying? It's just all about fashions.
Right. So now, how does it show up in our day-to-day lives? And in a way, why does it matter?
Excellent question, Sriram. Thank you for asking that. It shows up, and you deliberately use the word day-to-day, so I will answer that question. It shows up in your day-to-day, in some ways, in a very important way. You are walking down the road, you man or woman, at 2 a.m. because you've had a late night somewhere, and somebody is walking towards you, and your natural, implicit, unconscious bias, it is like the click of a finger, okay? It is that quick, your brain makes you feel that that person is not going to be safe for you. You cross the road. Does it matter that you did that? Yes, it does matter. Maybe that person was perfectly nice and lovely and would have done you no harm, but you were protecting yourself. And
Right.
so in day-to-day life, most often, the reason we have unconscious biases that go like that is because we want to feel safe. All of us in this room today don't want to feel unsafe. We want to feel in a safe environment. So what we do is we find ways instinctively, implicitly, because of the situation, to protect ourselves. And that's a good thing. Therefore, unconscious bias is not a bad thing.
Right.
If you bring it into a work situation, it then becomes unfair. And if you're using the word unfair, and I'm a huge proponent of being fair to human beings, and I'm hoping that everybody in the room is the same, then you've got to challenge those unconscious biases because you are already in a safe environment. And so if you are then going to decide that actually you're going to make a decision that you're going to recruit, let me just quickly look at these names, split-second decision here. I'm going to recruit P.A. Chako into my team because I know instinctively P.A. Chako is Malayali. And therefore, even though I've interviewed Supriya Jain and Kiran Ponnada, who are two women, I don't know what gender P.A. Chako is. I still instinctively want to give P.A. Chako, instinctively. The point is instinct. Because I feel comfortable, because I know Malayalis and I'm from Kerala. Do you see where I'm going with this? And that's unfair. Because I haven't actually allowed myself to give, whatever the names were, I said, Supriya Jain and Aarti Kalra, the right fairness in judging them to see if they're right for the job. So
Right.
that's the problem, you see? And so day-to-day life, more often than not, it is to keep safe, and that is a very good thing. I mean, Supriya writes that here. Unconscious bias happens because we want to feel safe, so we find ways to protect ourselves. Exactly. That's exactly it. But then there are sometimes you go into a social occasion, you go back to your day-to-day life question, which was your original question, and just making it up now that we are allowed parties. You go in, there are 25 people in the room. You only know your horse. Your instinct, because of this idea of safety, you particularly, Sriram, I'm saying because you're a man, could be that you veer towards 3 or 4 men standing to talk to each other. What's the harm in going and talking to 3 or 4 women? It's not going to make you in any way unsafe, but we just do that. So instead, what you should do is stand at the door, scan the room, and challenge that unconscious bias in a safe environment in your day-to-day.
Right.
And then, of course, there are people who might make judgments and assumptions about you purely because of their own narrative, because they have been brought up to be told. I don't know how many of you have traveled abroad, for example, but if you have, you may have been brought up to be told in India that Black people are dangerous. And I know certainly when Black people are in India, I've read stories about Nigerians and other African countries who've come and had enormous racist abuse in India. Now, let's imagine you're walking down the road at 10 o'clock in the morning in a safe environment, and there is a Black man walking, ahead of you, towards you. Are you deciding that you are unsafe? Ask yourself, why are you deciding that? Try and challenge that. So all of these things have to go in your mind split second for you to stop thinking about it.
Beautiful. So, one of the things that I remembered is in my workshops, people come and sit in different places when, especially if it's an open seating. And then I ask them, why did you sit here? What was the reason? Is it a corner? Is it next to someone? And then they're kind of, it just starts the whole process of saying, oh, okay, what went on over there?
Brilliant, brilliant. Love it.
So now, just see, we all have preferences, we have likes, and that is how we actually form friendships. And that is, in a way, how we live life, right? Because we have a preference for a certain food and a thing like that. Now, so preference is, drives a lot of how we live things. Now, when does this preference become unconscious bias, and when does it actually start giving us trouble?
Anyone in the room say you don't have good instinct, raise your hands. We all believe we have good instinct. And the older we are, the more we believe that. Correct? That's just how it is. If you're 18 or 20, if there is somebody of that age in our group, they might be questioning it a little bit. But once you go to 35, 40, 45, 50, I'm telling you, we all believe in our own instinct. We just can't help it. And that's okay too. I think, to me, the idea of challenging the preference is the word you chose to use, is very much when you have to make some very serious strategic decisions, work-based decisions around the future of XYZ. See, because at the end of the day, what you are doing, Sriram, and you've already mentioned this in the introduction of yourself, is trying to understand the word. I mean, that's how I'd like to talk to you about that, which maybe I'll interview for my podcast. What does happiness mean? The idea of the word happiness, it means different things to different people. But every one of us in this room want to be happy. Every one of us in this room want to create this environment of happiness. And we will do everything in our power to do that. Therefore, we will go with our instinct to create that sense of happiness. So I think it depends very much on the situation, which is why I keep bringing in the work idea, where you have to question decisions. Recruitment is a prime one. Giving people enough opportunity, talent management, succession planning. These three areas, talent management, succession planning, and recruitment, you have to stop and think about your preference, however good you think your instinct is, because obviously you're making the decision because you're now the director of your department. You're a very senior employee. You have worked for X number of years. You know what you're doing. And I love the idea, slight digression about moving people, because when you said that, I was remembering an interview I did with this extremely well-known classical singer, Karnataka classical singer in India called T.M. Krishna. I think he's extremely well-known. Some of you may know of him. And he told me a wonderful story in my interview with him, where whenever he sings, as if you've ever attended a Carnatic musical concert, you will realize that the singer sits in the middle and the musician sits on the side. He decided at one time that he was not going to sit in the middle. And he said it was so powerful that for the first time in his life, he did not sit in the middle. He sat at the side, and suddenly his whole idea of everything that he does changed. Can you imagine that? So simple. So simple. And I can't harp on about interviews. If you have a panel of 3 interviewing, inevitably the interviewee will look at the person in the middle. Please change. Rotate for every interview, because just moving from that seat to this seat to that seat will make you think differently. It is that powerful.
So as you mentioned about the instincts, right? So most times we think our instincts are good. We think we are fair. Intrinsically, we want to be good, and we believe, that we are in many ways. So it is basically unconscious bias is part of who I am. Right now, how do I go about deciphering this, or how do I even change this, and why should I even change it?
Yeah, so the why I kind of answered earlier, so I'm going to answer the why one more briefly, and then we talk about the how. The why, you must do why only when you really think it's important for an outcome. You want to see, let's imagine you're running a company that makes copper glasses. Okay. And the company's not doing as well as you want it to. it's possible that there is no sense of inclusion in that company. There is no sense of equality in that company. Stop thinking you know what you're doing just because you're the owner. Stop saying, I know what I'm doing. I've done it for 25 years. Of course it's going to work. Will it suddenly stop working? Why? So there has to be a motivation, right? Motivation
Basically,
is really
watch
working.
for your results, especially if your results are not
Yes.
positive.
There are more and more people leaving. Suddenly high attrition. Hang on a minute. What's going on here? Ask yourself why. And if that is the case, then you've got to stop. You've got to think. If you're only, and I'm telling you, I'm not exaggerating. Somebody invited me to do some research here. It's a PR firm that will remain nameless. Not research, sorry, training. And I went in to deliver the training, and the lady, the HR, head of HR, had invited me. I went in, it's a very small company, maybe 30 people, and all 30 were attending my training session. All 30 were women. All 30 other than one were white. And 27 out of the 29 who were white were blonde. And I went to the CEO and privately said, do you have a kind of company policy? I'm laughing thinking about it. And she looked at me puzzled and said, no. I said, look around you. What are you doing? How do you expect your company to be successful? I mean, but she hadn't seen it. So how? Your question, the answer to your how. Now, there are about 150 types of unconscious biases that psychologists, including Mazzari and Banerjee, have already done the research and done a hard work for us. So all I do is do my own research so I understand these types of unconscious biases. One of them is called confirmation bias. And that's the one you just talked about, Sriram, which is about the fact that I know I'm right. In fact, I took in the Times of India in long, maybe last year, or I can't remember when, there was a brilliant Dilbert cartoon. I don't know, those of you who read the Times of India, you read the Dilbert cartoon. It's absolutely brilliant. And it was about Dilbert going to have an appraisal with his boss. And his boss can't stand him, female boss. And he goes in there, and all the boss hears are negative things coming out of Dilbert's mouth. And then Dilbert says, so is this your confirmation bias? So what is confirmation bias? Essentially, it is finding reasons to prove yourself right. Again, unconsciously. That's, again, the power of our unconscious bias. And so there are hundreds of 150, 170, I've lost track, cognitive biases that psychologists have researched for us. And many of them are in our head at the same time, not one at a time. So how do we challenge them? We have to stop and think about why do we have unconscious biases. So if we go back to the first point of we want to feel safe, what is your story? Why is it that you even have that unconscious bias? Were you mugged by somebody once in your life and therefore you hate that group of people all the time? Is that fair? Was there a very traumatic experience you had at the age of 15 that has influenced every single decision you have made ever since? Is that still the right thing to do? And if it's not, then stop and think. But the problem, and I'm genuinely using the word problem, is it's an easy thing, but it's an extremely difficult thing because it's a very brave thing to do. Because at the end of the day, we all create our own reality, right? And we want to live and we want to be happy. So we have to challenge that in a gentle, safe environment and ask ourselves, why is it that we have these unconscious biases? Once we know that we have it, then it no longer is an unconscious bias, right? It becomes a conscious bias. Then it's about how do we challenge that and learn. So very simply put, in a social environment, you instinctively go towards the men. Next time, go towards the women. Gentle, little things. Be kind to yourself.
I think on the confirmation bias, I think that I've seen it play out a lot, especially in the corporate setup where we are in meetings and the boss has an idea. And then, everybody who kind of supports that, endorses that thing. And somebody who doesn't suddenly gets into a little bit of a defensive position because, and it's like, it's so subtle. It's very subtle. It's not obvious. The person is not trying to bully anybody, but it just plays out very beautifully. And then what happens is that people then know that if the idea is coming from the boss, they start, kind of being a little bit more.
And that also then says something about the boss. And is the boss giving, and you know what my unconscious bias was? Shall I be honest? I was visualizing man, sorry, forgive me. But I was visualizing a man boss who was not giving enough voice to his team.
Yeah.
That was my instinctive unconscious bias. It was unconscious though, and I forgive me. If I were in a work office, I would challenge that. Why am I thinking negatively of men more than I would not expect a woman boss to do that? I would expect a woman boss to speak and get women to the team to speak more. But do you see where I'm going? How instinctively, and because I do this for a living, I'm always challenging myself. And I thought I must share that thought in my head with the whole group immediately, because I was visualizing that. So it asks the boss, well, is the boss really being inclusive? Are they, and if especially, nowadays often it's hybrid. We have Zoom meetings, right? And I would hope, and I'm deeply frustrated that I'm looking at people's names and not at faces. I would actually request that you please open your cameras and show us your faces. I don't know why we can't see your faces. Is that a law that you created, Sriram?
No,
You
no,
said please switch off cameras?
I think
I
people are
hate
just
it.
letting us.
I absolutely hate it. I mean, what is that about? Do
Yeah.
you not want to see what you look like? You can see what we look like. Anyway, that's up to you, your decision. I'm not making you do something. But the point is, in a Zoom meeting, I would insist that all cameras are open.
Yeah.
And I would also, as a manager, as the leader or the boss, make sure that everybody gets equal voice. Because some people are naturally quieter in terms of communicating. That doesn't mean they don't have ideas. But we're so used to, I'll ask Sriram. Sriram is a good talker. He's got full of ideas. So keep asking Sriram. Whereas I have not given Aarti or, Sundar or Veera an opportunity. So what's the point?
Yeah. And I think, again, that's something that we see a lot in India, especially when you're having calls with, with other cultures. People have this tendency not to speak up. And then, later on, they kind of come back
I'm
and
welcoming somebody. Sorry. I see your face. Hooray. There's a human being. Who knows? They could be eating their lunch or dinner and gone for a walk. They're not even listening on the Sriram.
Yeah, by the way, Smita, it's not a girl, Kiran.
There you go. What do I know?
I'm driving. You wouldn't like this work. I'm driving and listening to you. So I'm going to go.
All right, fair enough. That you're allowed. You may switch off. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Sriram.
Yeah. So I think let's touch upon the angle of gender a little bit. And that's a reasonably deep and sensitive topic on its own. But I think the conflict that I see is that the way people grow up versus what is expected of them inside a modern organization, sometimes quite different. In fact, there have been where even in my coaching, I've come across people saying that I'm not really comfortable looking, and making eye contact with a female subordinate. And that's causing issues for me. I know it. I'm aware of it, but I still struggle with it, as a thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is a giant thing. Before I respond to that, I want to say welcome to Vasanta's dad, who's 81 and listening, and I am so excited about that. So, so welcome, Vasanta's dad. I welcome that you are listening to all of this, because to me, the whole idea of somebody who's 81 who is interested to know what this is all about, it warms my heart. But no, it's a big question that you've just asked, Sriram, because this is a much bigger question, which we may run out of time in answering. Because to me, this is the idea of society in India today. We're all Indians here. It doesn't matter that I happen to be sitting in London. But, the idea of patriarchy, the idea of hierarchy, the idea of expecting certain types of behavior that is instilled in you as a child, which is why I can't even explain to you how lucky I am. Because you live your life and you take your life for granted, right? You don't question it. It is only with the benefit of hindsight that you do question it. Yeah. And so when you're questioning it, I'm asking all of you who have left your childhood home and you are where you are, to question, look at the area lads. Now, they work very hard at challenging stereotypes. You know, the area lads, simple ones about challenging your unconscious bias. You know, I'm just trying to think of one. You know, there's one where, and I've done it. Okay, I have 3 sons and I've done it, where the mother is picking up the dirty laundry off her son's floor. And at that point, the phone rings from her daughter. And the daughter says, Mom, I have resigned from a fantastic job. And her mother said, please, Betty, don't resign. Why you resign? She said, I can't handle it. I can't manage the house and the kids. But why was she doing that? Because mother is bloody picking up the laundry. And so you've got to start changing behavior. And the child, the adult woman who has resigned, has learned from the mother who is picking up laundry. Go back and find that ad in YouTube. And has not challenged that natural instinctive behavior.
Right.
So, you know, it's about selling washing powder, but it's much more than they're very clever. But the point is, we cannot change society. The short answer is we cannot change society. We can only change ourselves. And if we change ourselves one little tiny bit at a time, and for those of us who are parents, and those who are parents of young children, now is the time to start making that change. Now is the time. There was research done, very small piece of research with 25 to 30 dads in the United States who had 2 children under the age of 4. There's of both genders, doesn't matter which order of birth, 1 boy, 1 girl, under the age of 4. And he was clipped with voice recording because it was too intrusive having a camera, and recorded everything he said to his children over a period of a month or something like that. You know, a good period of time. And then they researched the recordings. Every single father spoke differently to the girl than to the boy. Right there and then, they were embedding unconscious bias. And I'm making up this part of the story, but let's imagine little boy, doesn't matter which order of birth, falls and hurts his knee, grazes. Dad would say, hey, it's okay, you know, let me rub it, come on, let's go. Girl kisses her better. What are we then instilling in these 2 children? Think about that. So we have to start within our own little environment that we have, whatever that is. If you don't have children, think about people who you trust, people who you're close to, your friends, your family, your parents. I don't know, because all of us are different ages, different stages in our lives. Think about what that looks like. But it's a long one, and it's a constant one. But you must be kind to yourself, you must be gentle, and go back to what Sri Ram is advocating. It's about being happy. If it's going to make you unhappy, please don't do it. It's not worth it.
In fact, one of the trends that I now see is also that there's the angle of overcompensation, which is that, you know, I don't want to be a bad manager, so please don't work late, go early, you know, and then we have women employees actually coming back and saying, I want to be treated fairly. I don't want to be at a disadvantage. I want to have, you know, the right, you know, kind of performance measures, you know, which are equal to me. But the managers still, you know, kind of feel that, oh, okay, if something goes wrong.
And this overcompensation is manifest in many different ways, because I don't live in India, I live in London right today, and I am looking at what's going on here in terms of inclusion and fairness. People are frightened to open their mouths now, because managers and leaders, because they don't want to offend. And because of that, they're then making assumptions. You know what? Why don't you just ask? Have you forgotten how to just talk? You know, I heard a story about somebody coming back from maternity leave this was in Madrid. I was in Madrid doing some work, and she was coming back from maternity leave. And when she came back, she was looking forward to come back to work, and she was given a job that she didn't want to do. Why? Because the manager was overcompensating, your words, and I'm deliberately using them, and giving her a lighter load. She said, why didn't you ask me? I've just taken X number of months off, and I'm coming back, and I want to come roaring to do my thing. But you didn't ask. Why can't we just ask? And if we ask, honestly, openly, we will get the right answer.
Yeah.
And thank you for those opening your cameras.
I want to move to the corporate side. And one of the things that has always bothered me is that there is a conscious bias towards performance. And hence, we sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously treat our top performers differently in terms of opportunities, visibility, lots of kind of things. The issue with that is we don't know when it is unconscious, but overall, it still has a huge impact in terms of morale on the rest of the team.
Yeah, but this is what we were saying earlier, right? This is about succession planning and talent management. And the point is, all of us senior managers in this group want to make our life easier, right? So you, Sriram, I know I can trust you. You do the job well. I'm just going to ask you. I have no clue if anybody else can do it as well as you because I've never given them the opportunity. Will you take the risk? Will I take the risk, whoever you is?
Yeah.
And that is a genuine risk, correct?
Yeah.
And therefore, you have to stop and think. You've got to spend a lot of time in one-to-one conversations with your people, with your team, really get to know them, challenge your own confirmation biases, and then, go work backwards a little bit.
Yeah.
And then when you've got X report that you always give the Sriram or the whoever it is we're giving it to, think about who to give it to instead and say, but I am there to support you. But if you don't need me, you run with it because I think you can. Yeah. You've got to practice at it. There's a question that's come in here that I really want to respond to from Sampath, which is about microaggressions.
Yeah.
And what is the connection between unconscious bias and microaggressions? Are there any relationship? And my first instinct is Ayorama, because these are all, again, words that have come into the dictionary, into the lexicon, that nobody even knew existed. So what is a microaggression, some of you might be asking? And I will give you an example. So my name is Smita, and all of you in this room will be able to pronounce it perfectly. Hallelujah. Do you think the people I come across in this country can pronounce my name? Dear God, no. Do you think I am going to call it a microaggression? No. Do you think another Smita who has not challenged their own unconscious biases will call it a microaggression? Yes. That is the world we live in. And that is really frightening because a microaggression, very simply put, is if someone says or does something within a work environment that is not aggressive. I am not looking at you, Sriram, saying, Sriram, I don't like the way you look. You have a horrible, ugly smile. I don't like the color of your skin, your dark skin. I don't know, makeup, whatever story you want. I'm not doing that. I'm not being aggressive towards you. But I am very gently poking, pushing you, and pointing to and saying something to you where you are feeling lesser than. That is a microaggression. But then my question to all of us in the room, because this whole idea of unconscious bias and microaggressions are very nuanced, you see. So my question then to you is, if you are feeling lesser than, what is your story? We all have stories. Why is it that when I came into this country, when, in the 80s and 90s, late 80s, 90s, when I am certain there would have been many microaggressions directed towards me, I did not feel lesser than. Again, we can't change them. We can't change the man down the street screeching at somebody who's brown and abusing them. That will still happen today. That is a racist basic aggression. We can't change the person in your office saying something to you to make you feel lesser than. We can't, because that's just life. But what we can do is manage our own minds, our own thinking, our own ideas, and ask yourself, why is it that we feel that? So what's the connection between unconscious bias and microaggression? Essentially, our unconscious biases will make us feel lesser than to some degree, and therefore we feel the microaggression that you have put upon me. Am I making sense? Have I answered your question, Sampath Kumar? Kind of?
Yeah, Smita. Yeah.
I mean, it's a longer answer. These, we've only got a little bit of time, and there are so many different things we can explore here. You know that.
I know. Yeah. So very interesting. Thanks for that context. Yeah.
Thank you, Sampath. So, Smita, what's the antidote now? Now, you've, of course, mentioned a few of them in different parts of answers that you've given. But if you want people to take away something and say, okay, I get it. I know I have certain things. I don't know many things, but now I want to do something about it. So
Sure.
what would you really tell people?
If you are in a good place emotionally, mentally, you're not going through some major challenges in your life, because some of you could be, and you are happy. If you're feeling happy, you're feeling good about yourself, that's the first tip. If you are, that is a very good time to stop. The analogy that I have used, that Sriram knows about, that I use in my training sessions, is this idea of a backpack. And the fact that we carry, imagine you've got this rucksack or a backpack on your back, and wherever you go, you carry it around. It's a metaphorical backpack. And what we do is we fill that backpack with things, good, bad, and ugly, right? If you're in a good place, peace of mind, take that backpack off your back and a quiet place, not with other people around you. Open, unzip it and look inside and think about your stories. Think about your narrative and what kind of influences have you had from life-defining experiences. And have they been really, really traumatic, or have they changed you in different ways? And is that good? Is that bad? And think about why is it that, next time, for example, you instinctively react to something, your unconscious bias, when you're next home in a safe place, not immediately, not at that moment, to open that backpack, look inside and say, is there a story in there that maybe do that? Maybe all it is the books you read and the television you watch. It could be society. It's not all about the backpack. The safe bit is usually about the backpack because it's trauma. And trauma you don't want repeating. And that is keeping you safe. Otherwise, it's society. It's the world we live in. It's about patriarchy. It is, that is why aerial ads are challenging you in these ways. It's about movies we watch. If any of you have seen James Bond movies, I can't even remember now. Who was the bad guy 30 years ago? I think it might have been a Russian. And then it became maybe, different nationalities became the bad guys, remember? And so somewhere along the way, you make an assumption that all of those people from that country are villains, purely because James Bond has taught us that. So, we have to say, is that fair? Is that right? And we have to question it. But
Right.
the trauma bit is much more challenging. That's scary. You have to be brave. You have to stop. You have to ask. And you may not want to. You may look inside and say, you know what? I know what's in there. I now know it's a conscious bias, but I'm leaving it there. That's fine.
So I have a couple of questions on the chat, so I'm just going to ask you that. And so Sundar Chelappa asks, how do you personally deal with unconscious bias at work or in a social setting?
Matlab? I don't know what that means.
Yeah,
Clarify,
I can come off mute so I can explain. So as you went through this, you always spoke about, from your perspective, what can you do to change yourself, to deal with bias, right? To overcome your own bias. So now you assuming making steps, and you recognize in a social or a workplace that you're being treated unfairly, for example. Do we be like you, be a change agent, or how do you confront it, or just go with it?
Okay, I got you. So it depends very much on your hierarchical level, right? So let's imagine that you are not the boss. You are, and you feel that within your team that you're working in, there are other people and showing their unconscious biases towards you, and you're feeling less of that. That's what you're saying. Is that correct? To some degree?
Correct. And also considering I live in New York, right? This might apply to India, you in UK as well. So it's a diversity, of course, various kinds of diversity that exist here. So how do you deal with those situations?
Yeah. And so it really is. I think you have to, if you have the courage and you won't lose your job and they won't sack you, I think it really is important to have a connection and a private conversation with your line manager. If you see unconscious bias in a team where one of your colleagues, same level as you, is showing clear racism, homophobia, whatever you want to call it, I wouldn't show it up in the meeting because you'd embarrass them. What you want is a positive outcome, right? You don't want a negative outcome. You want people to gently think about what is their story. So you would, next time you meet so-and-so, you say, hi, so-and-so, do you know the last time we were at the meeting, I noticed you doing something. I wonder whether you weren't offended. Okay, you personally were not offended. But somebody else in your team, you felt for them because of something that somebody said. Their unconscious bias, they were not even aware of it. You pull them aside privately, separately, and say, I was thinking about that sentence that you said, and I'm just wondering, it's possible that you could have offended Joe, Jill, or Jack, whoever is in your team. And that might suddenly go, aha, they might. It all depends on how you say it. Because the purpose of your saying it, whether it's to your boss, whether it's to your colleague, is for them to have the thought that this is something maybe they hadn't been aware of. And that's the thing, in terms of, there are women who have, Black women in the United States and the UK, who have come to me and said, I get extremely offended when people come and talk to me about my hair. And I remember when I was at university in India, I had 2 women from Kenya. And I remember sitting with them because I was genuinely interested and curious. And I wanted to see how their hair was done. Now, would that be called racist now? Do you see, fashions are changing. This is the problem. I even remember their names so well because I was, we were in a hostel and I knew them well. And she came to my village in Kerala and everything. Grace, her name was. She had no problem. She wasn't offended. I didn't feel I was being racist. So I think we really have to think about open, honest communication. But we can't do that if we have in mind our own story. So if we are comfortable in our own skin, and we really feel we're trying hard to be inclusive in an organization, then what we can do is do not pull up. Gently, hey, should we go and have a coffee or something with a colleague? And over that coffee, over that chai, you say, you know what? I just wondered, the last meeting we were at, that's gently. You've got to be a little manipulative about this. I just wondered, I wonder how you felt. And oh, really? Well, I don't know. I was just thinking. That kind of conversation.
Absolutely. Or we could use your jokes, like your blonde jokes, at a place. We could use something like that as well. Yeah. I had another question as well to follow up, Sriram. So this is more, as we all continue to learn. I also work for a tech company. So I know you have this new title with AI for unconscious bias, right? So as we think about it, do you see at least playing a supporting role as humans continue to learn this in terms of recruiting or performance reviews where AI is as good as the model it's trained on? But do you think it's getting better in addressing performance reviews or the recruiting process in the meanwhile?
Yeah, I think blind recruitment to begin with. And I don't know what the companies are like in India anymore, but I'll give you an example of the Middle East. I think it might have been Dubai. Somebody I knew was doing an internship in HR in a company, and I maybe it wasn't Dubai, so forgive me, maybe I'm wrong. And the boss, which was doing an internship, this girl was given a stack of CVs. Every single CV had a photograph with the CV. And the boss said to her, anybody who's not white, throw it in the bin. And then we will recruit, then shortlist. And therefore AI can do the blind recruitment. And then you get a stack of CVs without photographs. Please, God, please do not ask for photographs. Please do not ask if they're married and have 3 children. Please, please, please. And then try and challenge. And if you're interviewing on Zoom, and this is a very challenging idea, and it's not even AI, but it's challenging your unconscious bias. If you're interviewing on Zoom, keep your camera on so they can see you. Tell them to keep their camera off. So you do not see them and you do not make judgments based on, oh, I like that color green. Maybe I'll interview, maybe I'll hire. Do you know what I mean? There are little things that are going on constantly in our head. The power of the brain is amazing.
Thank you, Smita. Thank you.
So I think as you're answering the question, one of the things that came up, of course, was psychological safety in teams, right? Where both the manager as well as team members are actually open to, kind of perspectives which are different from their own, and it, you know, it doesn't come easy. And even as a manager, it took a while, because for my subordinates or my direct reports to actually come back and tell me, hey, that didn't land well, or, you know, I think, you know, people sense something off over there. But over time, and you know, you kind of, with the trust that you have with people, if you're able to kind of thing. And then for me, I think my thing was to go back into the meeting and say, hey, I got this feedback. And you know, that was not the intention. I kind of understand that this didn't land well, but this is where I was coming from. And that kind of opens it up. And then people kind of say, okay, now I get it. I'm kind of a little bit better about voicing this. And I think if you're able to do more of that more authentically, I think, you know, kind of thing got.
Absolutely. You know what it reminds me of, Sriram? And for those of you, some of you might know, it's a very old management communication model called the capital J-O, capital H-A-R-I. You're nodding, right? You know Joe Harry.
Yeah.
Joe Harry's window of communication. So capital J and then the letter O and then capital H-A-R-I, Joe Harry window of communication. And essentially what the Joe Harry, those two guys, Joe and Harry, I don't know what their full names are saying is that if you really want to instill trust and really want to get people to be inclusive in your department, it is about showing a little bit about yourself too. It is, if you give of yourself, only then will you get. Otherwise, why should they trust you? The direct reports only think, you know, they think you're perfect. Nobody is perfect.
All right, I'm going to open it up for one last question from the audience. Otherwise, we'll just go into closing comments. Any other last questions? We have just a minute or so to go. Anybody has any questions?
More of a comment, Sriram. Thank you very much. And definitely, this was a great session for us early morning. Appreciate it. All right.
Thank you.
I was safe driving. I'm glad you pulled over.
I had to, yes. And for you, this is important. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Vasanta's dad, I hope you enjoyed it.
All right, Smita, thank you so much. Any closing comments from your end on just, you know, before we just close?
I think the idea and the power of unconscious bias, the more I do research and work with it, the more I think it is the bedrock of all of us as human beings. I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but I really do. And think about it. Do some reading. You know, hear my podcast, not just because I'm selling it to you, but it's the stories of my stories, to hear their stories. You know, I'm now just started season 9. You've got about 88 stories to hear if you want to. Start thinking about this idea of how we think and why do we have our brains running like this. I think it's just a wonderful thing. And do it gently, be kind to yourself, be happy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining, Smita.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Thanks, Smita.
time.
Really
Thanks,
a
everyone,
good session,
for
Sriram.
We'll put up the
Thanks for
recording for
inviting.
people, yeah, who want to see it as well. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, everybody. Smita, thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.